Thank the Parliamentary Secretary. The question is that the bill be now read a second time, and I call the member for Wills.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. That was a remarkable speech from the member for Paterson. He was spruiking the renewable energy projects which have sprung up in recent years and talking about the merits and values of those projects, and he made many worthwhile and important points. But the remarkable thing is that the very projects that he was extolling have been made possible either by the Renewable Energy Target, which this government is determined to cripple, or by the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, which this bill proposes to abolish. The member seemed oblivious to the fact that his government is determined to kill off the very projects that he was talking up. Deputy Speaker, the Labor government established the Australian Renewable Energy Agency, known as ARENA, in 2012 as an independent agency designed to improve the competitiveness of renewable energy technologies in Australia and to increase the supply of renewable energy to Australia's electricity market. ARENA works to reduce the cost of renewable energy technology development and to increase its use in Australia. ARENA provides financial assistance for the research, development, demonstration and commercialisation of renewable energy and related technologies, develops skills in the renewable energy industry, promotes renewable energy projects and innovation both nationally and internationally. ARENA currently supports more than 190 renewable energy projects, drawing more than $1.5 billion in private sector investment. There are currently a further 190 renewable energy projects in the pipeline which have the potential to draw more than $5 billion in private sector funding. 70% of ARENA funding has gone to projects in rural and regional Australia, creating jobs for the future in these areas. The Liberal government's proposal to axe ARENA puts these projects in jeopardy. This bill risks the investment arrangements already in place for existing projects and puts a complete freeze on future investment arrangements. Now, the Liberal Party is quick to cry foul and make hysterical claims about sovereign risk if a Labor government takes any action which impacts on any company's bottom line, but the way in which it subjects the renewable energy industry to constant policy changes and rough handling beggars belief. These are real industries providing a real service in a carbon-constrained world. They are the industries of the future. Experience from renewable energy markets overseas has shown that stable, long-term policy support provides the renewable energy industry with the required incentives to expand the renewable energy market. A clear commitment from the federal government on the policy frameworks surrounding renewable energy in Australia, such as the Renewable Energy Target, provides the long-term certainty needed to encourage growth of Australia's renewable energy industry. Now, the number of countries with renewable energy targets more than doubled between 2005 and 2012, with at least 118 countries now having renewable energy targets in place, so over half of the world's countries. Of these, 109 countries have policies to support renewables in the power sector. Currently, 19 of the G20 member countries have some sort of renewable energy support policy, and all of Australia's top 10 trading partners have policies to promote renewable energy. So it's not something where we are out there on a limb or on a frolic of our own. This is what countries right around the world are doing. And a central reason for this is the potential for renewable energy to create jobs. Worldwide, an estimated 5 million people work directly or indirectly in renewable energy industries. Global investment in 2010 reached $243 billion US, an increase of 30% from 2009. So countries right around the world are recognising the benefits of renewable energy as a central element to remaining economically competitive. And recent research indicates that France, Japan, the United Kingdom, South Korea and Germany are currently best prepared to be competitive in the global low-carbon economy. These countries, by moving first in adopting policies that support renewable energy and low-carbon technologies, will experience superior rates of learning, better cost reductions and are currently best prepared to be competitive. Meanwhile, Australia is the only country in the G20 which has become less prepared for the low-carbon economy since 1995 and faces some of the biggest challenges in remaining competitive in a low-carbon future, ranked 16 in the G20 behind Argentina, South Africa, Saudi Arabia and Russia. If Australia continues a lack of commitment to policies that support renewable energy, then the costs of shifting to a low-carbon economy will be higher and we risk losing our international competitiveness. Of overriding importance is the need for policy stability and certainty so investors commit funds that will grow the industry and Australia can catch up in the global race to transition to a low-carbon economy. Labor's renewable energy policies have been a success story, yet they are all now under attack from the Liberal government. In addition to the bill before the House to abolish the Renewable Energy Agency, the government had legislation before the parliament to abolish the Clean Energy Finance Corporation, and of course we've been reading in the papers in recent weeks that the Prime Minister wants his Renewable Energy Target review panel to recommend scrapping the RET altogether. Deputy Speaker, it is a mystery as to why the Liberal government wants to put an end to such successful policies that deliver savings to Australian households, create Australian jobs, drive investment in Australian industries and are good for Australia's environment. During our time in government, wind power tripled, jobs in the renewable energy industry tripled to more than 24,000, and Australian households with solar panels on their roofs skyrocketed from around 7,000 to over 1 million. Some of the wind and solar farms in Australia are the biggest in the Southern Hemisphere. Investment in these projects was being driven by the Renewable Energy Target, and when Labor was in government, Australia ranked in the top 4 most attractive places in the world to invest in renewable energy projects. Since the election of the Liberal government and since the scare campaign against renewable energy, Australia has fallen to 9th on the global index. The RET review, the attempts to axe ARENA and the CEFC and the Prime Minister's rhetoric, false rhetoric about the impact of the RET on power prices has stalled investment in the renewable energy industry. It is risking jobs and businesses. Deputy Speaker, a recent news poll published in The Australian, Wednesday 20th of August, showed that 98% of Australians support renewable energy. And recent research released by the Climate Institute, the Australian Conservation Foundation and the WWF has highlighted that under a termination scenario of the RET, then coal-fired power generators would reap an extra $25 billion in profits between 2015 and 2030. And I suspect that herein lies the real reason behind the government attacks on the RET. The RET has been such a resounding success that vested interests in the energy sectors are not happy with renewable energy gaining a larger than expected share of the electricity market. Under the current ownership arrangements, Energy Australia is the company that would stand to gain most. Its potential extra profit would be about $1.9 billion if the RET were reduced and $2.2 billion if it was abolished. If AGL purchased Macquarie Generation, it would become by far the biggest beneficiary of reducing the RET, with combined extra profits of $2.7 billion if the RET were reduced, and Origin Energy's total extra profit would be about $1.5 billion. Origin owns the power station that would emit the largest amount of additional pollution under a reduced RET. Deputy Speaker, what the modelling also established was that abolition of the RET would see no reduction to household power prices and carbon emissions would climb by 15 million tonnes a year on the back of a 9% increase in coal-fired power. In fact, when I had discussions with Tim Sonreich from the Clean Energy Council, he pointed out, and the Council points out, that scrapping or scaling back the renewables target would see electricity prices rise, not fall, due to greater use of gas in the energy sector at a time when gas is soaring in price. The modelling commissioned by the Climate Institute and Australian Conservation Foundation and WWF indicated that for a household consuming 6.5 megawatt-hours of electricity annually, which is the New South Wales average, reducing the renewable energy target would add about $35 to the annual power bill, most of this increase taking place after 2020. An abolition of the Renewable Energy Target would add about $80 a year to the annual power bill. Deputy Speaker, this puts to the sword the claim made by the Prime Minister in July that the RET is significantly driving up power prices, and reveals that the government is more in the thrall of climate change denialism than having a genuine concern for cost of living pressures. The same modelling also indicated that reducing the renewable energy target would cost the federal budget about $680 million in extra funding to meet Australia's target of 5% emissions reductions by 2020, in addition to the socialised costs amounting from higher levels of pollution, which the modelling estimated conservatively to be $14 billion. Now, I think it's ironic that this is a government that talks about direct action. The Renewable Energy Target is direct action, yet the government makes spurious arguments to try to justify its abolition. The review into the RET was set up by the government was headed by a known climate change denier. Even then, according to reports, it's found that the RET did not add significantly to household and commercial power bills, and in fact it accounts for only 3% of an average household electricity bill. And the government's apparent intention to ignore its own stacked inquiry reflects a predetermined view of climate change by this government. They do not believe in it, full stop. And the removal of RET, the tragedy of this, is that it will jeopardise around 1% of GDP in committed capital investment. And it is regrettable that we've got a government that is more concerned with the ideological outcome or the vested interest than it is with a sound and visionary policy, which is what the Renewable Energy Target is. Deputy Speaker, this is real sovereign risk, not that bogus sovereign risk levelled at the mining tax or recently by the Trade Minister when he was talking about the budget in the Senate. If this happens, if we have abolition of the RET, this will be done with no lead time in the teeth of the policy taken to an election. And I also make the point that we've seen the abolition of the carbon price, and that underscores the ongoing importance of the Renewable Energy Target. It is now the only game in town, the only national initiative directed at reducing Australia's greenhouse gas emissions, the last hope. Scrapping it at this point is removing Australia's only remaining substantial carbon abatement policy, with all of the negative flow-on effects that will have for the local and global emissions mitigation effort, as well as exposing Australia to big risks in terms of future international policies. And if the government is genuinely concerned about the significant power price increases which have taken place, and I've spoken in the House about this previously, they have taken place, it needs to look at the overinvestment in power distribution networks, which accounts for 3/4 of the increases that have occurred. I note that Miles George, the Managing Director of the renewable company Infigen Energy, has said either scaling back or terminating the RET would be devastating. He said the creation of sovereign risk would be significant and that the very issue had been raised by prospective foreign investors, including Canadian pension funds, which the Prime Minister sought to woo on one of his overseas trips in June. He said Infigen's shareholder base of over 20,000 investors has invested in renewable energy in Australia on the basis of a fixed target of 41,000 gigawatt-hours by 2020. This is no different to investors in private or public partnerships acquiring a toll road concession or a port lease. If the government pulls the rug from under institutional investors in renewable energy, we shouldn't expect those investors to come back to buy other infrastructure assets here. And, Deputy Speaker, it is high time the Liberal government stopped undermining and white-anting renewable energy. Australia has what it takes to be leading the race in developing a renewable energy industry. World-class renewable energy resources, a skilled workforce and a proud history of innovation. We need to exploit this comparative advantage and embrace the huge opportunities that our renewable energy provides Otherwise, we risk falling behind. The community is calling for it, business is ready to invest, and we and future generations will benefit from this investment.
Thank the member for Wills. The question is that the bill be now read a second time. I call the member for Irons.
Swan will be.
Swan. Oh, sorry.
Swan will be. Yeah. Thanks.
Good look at the red writing, not the black writing.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise to speak on the Australian Renewable Energy Agency Repeal Bill 2014. And despite those opposites' claim to the contrary, fiscal reform is needed in Australia. And the Coalition, as a responsible government, needs to rein in expenditure if we want any hope of putting our economy back on a sustainable path to surplus. The reason those opposite have challenged the government's budget reform measures is not because they are unjust or irresponsible. It is because to do so would mean they have to finally admit and accept that their cash-splash approach to running the government for 6 years is what caused every Australian to be now faced with billions in deficits, and that is projected to rise to $667 billion if we don't fix the unsustainable spending path those opposite have put us on. Every member of the public has to balance their personal budget to make ends meet, and a responsible government has to do that as well. Unfortunately, this concept of economic responsibility was forgotten year after year under the former government, despite their ongoing claim that a surplus was just around the corner. Now, I don't know what path those opposite thought they were walking on, but it certainly wasn't one to surplus, after delivering $191 billion in deficits in their first 5 budgets. I think it's safe to say that those opposite have no idea what a surplus